Oh, hi there! So this is the video that I wanted to make for a very long time because a lot of people have been asking me on my Instagram how did I learn French from 0 to C1 in 10 months. There is no secret to it, I'm just going to share my experience. I don't want to make this into a very long video, so let's just get down to it. I'm going to tell you all the details, everything that you need to know about my story with French. Let's start with a little background. My native language is Russian and I've been learning English since I was very little, since I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I don't think I had a very good base to start with. I think it's a lot easier for Spanish or Italian speakers to learn French because these languages are much more similar. Why did I decide to learn French in the first place? Well, since I've learned English and I got C2 on my IELTS, I decided that I want to know another foreign language and not just know it as to speak with native speakers on daily topics, but I want to learn it proficiently. I want to prove it with a certificate, and that's what I decided to do. That was my New Year's resolution. It was January 1st, 2019. And I set a goal for myself to study French and do it maybe as quickly as possible. So it took me 10 months to get to C1. But step one was to begin. I'm not the most hardworking person. In fact, I was labeled as lazy in high school. Thanks a lot, by the way. But at the same time, I'm a controlling person. And that is the trait that both helps me and messes up with my life a little bit. In this case, it was helpful because to learn a foreign language proficiently, you don't need just conversational phrases or know the basics of grammar. You need to know more complex structures in order to understand the news, in order to understand academic papers and native speakers speaking very fluently and using verlan and all these fun things. And there's nothing wrong with going another way. There are plenty of people who can communicate without any troubles with native speakers. They can write in French, they can understand 80% or 100% of everything without diving deep into the grammar, but that's what I wanted to do because I need to control every aspect of a language. Let's get down to the details. So the first two things that I did was that I downloaded Duolingo as any other person on the planet when they start learning a foreign language, and I bought a textbook. In the beginning, I think any textbook will do. This one was mine. It was in my native language. It was fine, I guess. It's not the best. It has some weird structure that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but generally you can just take any textbook that you like in your bookstore in your native language or in English language, and that will be enough to begin with. Also, it turned out when I tried other textbooks later that a lot of them have grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes, so that was the thing that bothered me because I already knew a language a little bit, and that is harmful, I think, when a book has grammar and spelling mistakes for the very beginners because they are going to learn the wrong way. So be careful with that. I don't know actually how to do that when you're just starting at zero, but don't take everything that you see in books as truth. The problems that I had with my textbook were that, first of all, it had some examples that are not in any way realistic, and you wouldn't use these examples in real life. For example, you would see a lot of phrases like Charles va à la gare, which is such a weird phrase that you don't see in movies, you don't hear it anywhere, you don't read it anywhere. Or something like Ma camarade Sophie va à sa place. Who talks like that? No one in real life talks like that. So these examples are, I think that's the problem with any textbook on a foreign language, because they have these unrealistic examples to maybe make it easier for first-time learners to go through the complex structures of languages, but you never use them, so I don't see a point of learning them. Another thing that, in my opinion, was wrong with this book, but that's just my personal preference, is the structure of the book. There's this thing with me that when I see a rule in a textbook, for example, we have a present tense there, and I study it, I take notes, everything is cool, but 2 lessons later, the book says, hey, remember that rule or word that we've learned 2 lessons ago? Well, there's an exception or there's additional rules to that. And that bothers me because I make notes and now I need to come back to my notes and add something to them, but that doesn't work, so I have to remove the last 5 pages of my notes and rewrite everything because otherwise the notes won't look good. I just realized that I sound like a crazy person, but anyways, I like to learn everything at once. Another example is when I have a word, for example, to say. Then I would look up in the dictionary the words for to tell, to speak, to ask, to answer, all of the words that you would use connected to speech or speaking. And that is another thing with textbooks, that they organize the vocabulary in a way that's not very convenient for me. Maybe the majority of students like when things are scattered around the textbook. When I was making my own study materials later, I would include these words, this vocabulary in little groups, and I would also write down everything that you need to know about the grammar rules or tenses, for example, everything with all the exceptions that you need to know. So I was doing one lesson of textbook per day. That was about 20 to 30 minutes with making all the notes, and at the same time I was doing Duolingo sessions, and I was doing them essentially before the hearts went out. So it would take about 20 to 30 minutes as well. The cost of textbook is here. Duolingo is fortunately free, but you can get a premium version. The cost, I think, varies across countries. My opinion on Duolingo, it's a great additional source. It shouldn't be used as a primary source though, because the vocabulary is rather limited. The examples are, again, not very relevant to our daily life. You have ducks eating dogs and something like that. But it was a great way to practice your listening and pronunciation when you repeat after the speakers. It was an amazing way to practice grammar and sentence structures. By the way, I've completed the whole French course there. 2 levels for each topic was enough for me to memorize the words, so I moved rather quickly. As you can see, I studied for 4.5 months with no breaks from January 1st to May 12th. So that's what I've been doing in the first couple of months. I was getting used to a new language, I was going through my textbook, I was going through Duolingo, and we come to step 2, choosing an exam and practicing for it. Where I lived, I had 3 options for the exam to choose from. I had DELF, TEF, and TEF. I immediately decided that I don't want to take DELF because I had to choose a level to test for, and I didn't know my level back then, so I decided to choose between TEF and TEF. And from what I've read online, TEF is a little more complicated, so I chose TEF. And once I've selected my test, I began looking for materials, and let me tell you, that is a challenge because they're not the textbook that I found specifically for TEF preparation was very outdated. It was, I think, from 2004. There are very few videos on YouTube available. There are no apps, there are no websites for TEF exam preparation, so my resources for preparation were rather limited. I understand why though. It's not a very popular exam. I think there are more prep materials for DELF. And I figured I would be fine with listening and reading because when you go through learning language, understanding comes a lot easier than expression. So I decided to only focus on speaking and writing. And the way to do that for me was that I took topics for writing and speaking, and I found a person on italki to practice with. It was a man from France, and I booked a few sessions with him. So what I did was I asked him to role play the situations from the exam with me, and to correct any of my mistakes and to answer some of the questions I've had during my study process. I've also tried to write something before the session and ask him to correct it and to see what I could improve. I think the sessions went fine overall. We didn't really connect, so it was kind of a weird atmosphere at the lessons. So I would definitely recommend to change the person if you feel uncomfortable with him or her. This wasn't a professional teacher that I booked, but there are also professional ones available on italki. You can book them and select your price range. It varies from this to this. So I've been doing that for 2 months, I think during mid-March to April and beginning of May. And we come to step 3, which is to take the test. I booked the exam date for mid-May. that would be 4.5 months since I started learning French, so from January 1st to mid-May. Since I've had experience with language tests before, I took TOEFL and IELTS, I knew generally what to expect. Normally you would have 4 parts: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And this exam is no exception. There is only a difference with speaking and writing. For speaking, you get 2 parts. First one is to pretend to call a company or a person and ask some information about the ad that they've posted online or in a newspaper in a formal way. The second task is to pretend to meet with your friend and persuade them in an informal way to try some activity. Usually it's volunteering or going on a vacation or taking a language course, changing their job, something like that. For writing, you also get 2 parts. The first one is to write the continuation of a story, and the second one is just a standard essay. I took the test with a French lady who was very nice. I was super nervous to talk to a native speaker for the first time, but she was super nice. I was the only person there because the exam is not very popular, so I think it went well. I guess it's a good result for 4 months after starting from zero. The test price is here. I think it also varies from country to country and test center to test center, so this is the approximate price. You have to check with your own location. Even though this result was okay, of course I wasn't satisfied with it because the end goal is to become fluent in a language, so we come to step 4, which is to increase the difficulty. It's worth mentioning, I think, that throughout the first 4 months I was studying about 4 to 5 hours a day. It wasn't 4 or 5 hours in a row. Usually I would do a Duolingo session in the morning and a textbook sometime around that as well, and throughout the day I would scatter some of the activities like watching a YouTube video or listening to a song or trying to translate something online. I didn't immerse myself in grammar and books only. I decided to make the language come to me naturally. Because I finished Duolingo, I needed another app to practice with, and after looking through every single app on App Store, I picked one that worked for me. That is Linguist. That's a very underrated app. I think it has great vocabulary. It has some grammar materials as well. It's a little more complicated. It's of a higher level than Duolingo. That's why I wouldn't recommend it for the very beginners. But what's good is that they use sentences from real materials. So you would see the word being used in context naturally. You wouldn't just see a phrase, ducks eat bread or something like that. Unfortunately, it is not free, but when I started, I think it had a trial period, so I tried it for 2 weeks or 1 month, I don't really remember. The price is here, but I think it's very much worth it. That's only my opinion, and this video is not sponsored by Linguist. Another great source for me was Netflix. Not a lot of people know that, but you can actually change the audio of your Netflix account. In order to do that, you have to log in your account in your browser, not in the app, and change the language of your account to the language you are studying. For me, it was French, and it unlocked the French audio for me. I don't think it works for everyone. Some people I know have tried using VPN, and that worked, so play around with the settings. Even though the French audio is unlocked, the French subtitles don't match. I think that's because the subtitles were translated separately from English audio to French language by a different person. They didn't look up the French audio for the movie or TV show. The price for Netflix varies from region to region, and I think a lot of people are canceling it now. But anyways, for me it was a great source because it has a lot of TV shows and movies that you can watch starting from your favorite ones to make it easier. I can recommend my favorite TV shows that have great vocabulary and dialogues. Number 1 is Mad Men. It has so many episodes and so many dialogues, and it's just excellent.
Quand ils ont un lien sentimental avec votre produit.
Number 2 is Better Call Saul. It's an insanely good show, very underrated. It has many dialogues as well and some legal specific vocabulary.
Et je vais pas te laisser te battre tout seul contre eux.
Non! Donc, je vais arranger ça moi-même. Moi, Jimmy McGill.
Number 3 would be The Crown. The language there is a little more formal, but that's good to practice it.
Mon prénom est Elisabeth.
Soit. Longue vie à la reine Elisabeth.
There are many more movies and TV shows, of course, you can pick the ones you like more. At this point, I've also started reading Harry Potter, and that is also, I think, a very good source because you have 7 books that increase in difficulty. So you can start with the first one, which is very easy. It was written for kids, and then the difficulty increases, the books become thicker. There are many beautiful descriptions of locations and dialogues and informal conversations between friends at Hogwarts, so I think it's still really good. The only downside would be that it uses le passé simple a lot. That is the tense that I can honestly say I have never learned, because this is a very specific fiction tense that you wouldn't use anywhere. You wouldn't speak with it. It would only be helpful if you're writing a book in French. If you're not a fan of Harry Potter, you can choose another book that you've read hundreds of times and find its French translation, and that would be helpful as well. An awesome source that helped me upgrade my vocabulary was Disney in French channel on YouTube. It's an official Disney channel. It has movie clips and, most importantly, songs from Disney movies in French with subtitles. I took the lyrics of the song, I translated everything I didn't know, then I memorized the lyrics and I would sing along with the song. Why I think it's a great source? Because the grammar and vocabulary there are very good for French students. So you wouldn't see there any slang words, any curse words. The sentences are grammatically correct, and most importantly, the words rhyme, so you memorize them easier. And at the same time, you practice your listening skills and your pronunciation skills by repeating with a singer. Some other things that I did that I think I should mention are to memorize the accents in French words. I would write them down hundreds of times to memorize how they're written, how they're spelled. That is routine, monotonous work, but it helps. To practice pronunciation, the best way to do that I have discovered, maybe you can share some of your own experience, was to repeat after native speakers as well as possible. And another thing is to learn some linking words and phrases. That is the thing that also bothers me with textbooks, because they don't include such phrases as "to begin with," "in my opinion," "I agree with you," "but," blah blah blah. So all these words are an essential part of any foreign language, but unfortunately in a lot of textbooks they're not included, and that's why you may think that you sound like a robot when you learn a foreign language. How are you? I'm good. How are you? Great. Bye. So that's not a natural dialogue at all. But how do you express your opinion other than "je pense que"? That is the question, and there are actually multiple ways to do so. You can say "j'imagine que," "je suppose que," "je trouve que." When I was making my own materials, I also included big chapters on these conversational linking words and phrases. And we come to step number 5, which is to take the test again. So in November 2019, I decided to take the test again. It was 10 months after I started from zero. Overall, it went well. I got C1 in both reading and listening, B2 in writing, and B1 in speaking, unfortunately. Of course, that wasn't enough for me, but I was still proud of getting C1 in understanding for both reading and listening just 10 months after starting from zero. And we're quickly moving to step number 6, which technically should be step number 1, is assessing your weaknesses and strengths. After taking the second exam, I looked at myself realistically and decided to find out what I did wrong, what stopped me from going all the way to the native level. I've discovered that I'm really bad at improvising, which is a shame because improvisation is a huge part of language tests. You get a topic for writing or speaking, you have 1 minute to prepare, and you need to express yourself as best as you can. And that's, for me, not just a problem with foreign languages, it's a struggle for me in my native language as well. When I need to call someone, like a company, to ask them about their service or something like that, I need to write down the list of everything I need to ask in case I forget or in case I mess up the words, and I rehearse these questions beforehand. So that's the thing that bothers me in my own language as well. But at the same time, I've discovered that I have a really great memory. So I decided to use it to my advantage. I needed to memorize as much as possible. I would role play dialogues with myself. I would rehearse the parts for both people in the dialogue. I would also take a phrase and make 5 to 7 sentences with it and try to memorize them as well. The most helpful part at this point was that I would take a topic for writing or speaking, mostly for writing because essays were easier for me. And I would write an essay, for example, 250 words. And I would take italki sessions with a native speaker. Again, this time it was a Canadian guy who was much younger and we connected much better. So he went through my essays that I sent him before the session and he corrected some of the mistakes that I made there. We discussed them. I asked him what could I do to improve them. And after we corrected the essays, I would rewrite them into the correct form. And I would memorize them and recite them to myself out loud over and over and over again until I memorized the whole of it. I wouldn't recommend, if you get the topic that you've memorized on the exam, to write just the same piece of writing. What it did for me was I would memorize certain phrases and how, for example, such complicated structures as subjunctive and conditional are used. So I could take some phrases that I've memorized from different essays that would work if you change a couple of words in any other topic. And then it was 2020. You know what happened, so it became much more difficult to book an exam day. All the centers were closed, and since we were on lockdown, I was just practicing 1 or 2 hours a day, not even every day. Sometimes I skipped a couple of days, but I would do these training sessions with myself much more efficiently than before, because at that time I already knew my strengths and weaknesses, which is why I think you should assess them before you start learning a foreign language. In March 2021, I managed to book an exam session. It was in another city because the test center in my city didn't renew their license or something like that. They decided to go with TEF instead, but I wanted to take TEF because I already knew the structure, I already knew what to expect, so I had to travel to another city. It was 5 hours by train to take the test. In this city, there was a French guy who did the test with me, but let me show you the results first. I would say that's impressive. That's roughly 2 years after starting from zero. I even got C2 in listening. But I want to say what happened with speaking there. So first part of speaking, as I've already mentioned, is questions. You need to call the company or a person and ask them some formal questions. And I nailed this part. This was like my most fluent self. I would react to his words. I would make the conversation flow naturally. It was so well that I was a little bit arrogant by the end of it. The second part though, where I had to convince a friend to do something. In this case, it was to fix his car by himself instead of going to a car repair shop. The French guy that I've told you about before suddenly decided to change his attitude. So even though the first part went well and we had a natural conversation, in the second part he started to roll his eyes. He would turn away from me. He would make a bored expression. And I was really confused. I've heard about such cases when the examiners try to make it more difficult for you, but I've never experienced them in real life. So, of course, I stumbled. I was confused. I didn't know what was happening. Maybe I was doing something wrong. But I couldn't stop because the speaking part was recorded. You only have 10 minutes to finish it. So by the end of it, I was almost crying. And when we finished, he just suddenly left. And I asked another lady who was present at the speaking part what just happened, and she said he probably wanted to give you a high grade, to give you an opportunity to express yourself in a difficult situation, and I just thought that he was being an asshole because I didn't ask him to do that. Anyways, I told this story to show you that it doesn't matter how much you prepare, it's always the humans that you're dealing with and anything can happen. You shouldn't get upset if this happens, even though I was very upset. But that's the last TEF exam that I took. It was in March 2021. The certificate is only valid for 2 years, so I have to renew it next year. Maybe I will make another video on how I prepare for it. So that is the end of my story. That is the total cost of my preparation. If you have any questions, please post them down below. I will answer them, or just contact me on my Instagram. The link would be in the description section. À bientôt. See you next time.